The poison of corporate-controlled information is pervasive within the American media landscape, which makes the Laura Flanders Show one of the most important places that we can go to understand how power works, the reality around us, and how to resist. This is Chris Hedges, and I listen to the Laura Flanders Show.
Go to patreon.com/The LF Show and become a member. Hi, I'm Laura, and this is the Laura Flanders Show, a TV and radio program that shines a light on the solutions of tomorrow today. We report on the people and movements driving systemic change from the worlds of politics, arts, and entrepreneurship. Welcome. In a recent episode we titled Unforget, Dream, Build, we featured two Latinx Americans whose work flies against all those narratives that portray immigrants and immigration as a problem or a threat. Award-winning journalist Roberto Lovato talked about his memoir on Unforgetting, and MacArthur Genius Award winner Cristina Jiménez, co-founder of United We Dream, talked about how her generation is finding the good as well as the bad in the immigrant experience. There was so much in Cristina's story that spoke to her heart and moved ours that we wanted to release much more of it here, uncut. So, right here, right now, you'll hear Cristina Jiménez sharing her own story about growing up as an undocumented teen in Queens, New York, and her growth as an activist, as well as her finding love and romance there. Here's Cristina Jiménez on dreaming, fighting for immigration reform, and finding freedom in the face of ICE crackdowns and the COVID-19 pandemic. Cristina Jiménez, thank you so much for joining us. Roberto Lovato ends his book by attending a Central American Youth Leadership Conference, where he comes away kind of encouraged that the next generation of young people in his community perhaps have a less bifurcated, divided, troubled relationship to their history. So I want to begin by asking you about your story. What's the story of your family, and are there any silences in your history?
Like many immigrants, my parents and our family made the difficult choice to come to this country in seek of a better life. We were in Ecuador, where I was born, in the city of Quito. And in the 1990s, the country was going through political and economic turmoil. Millions of people lost jobs. There were strikes that paralyzed the country for days. And my parents were many of the millions of Ecuadorians that lost their jobs. And I just remember seeing my parents, who had raised me with so much love and, came from working class backgrounds, trying to find a job, and they would just not be jobs available.
Now, what years are we talking about, Cristina? So people in the U.S. can relate to what's happening to us when this was happening to your family.
In Ecuador in the mid-1990s, so, we're talking about 1995, 1996, 97, and we came in 1998. There was a coup around that time in the country. Banks also took all of the savings from people in the country, and many banks shut down, backed by the United States, actually, stealing people's monies and savings and leaving the country. And that leaves an economy that is completely unstable. Employers are afraid because of the uncertainty politically, and many companies and employers shut down and also flee the country. So that leads to massive unemployment, people who lost their life savings when the banks stole the money and left the country, including people like my own parents. So finding a job in a situation like that became really difficult. And we went for months where we increasingly didn't have money for food some days or to pay for rent, much worse to even pay for school. And my parents' dreams, both of them who grew up working class and couldn't afford to get a college education, their dream was that their children will be able to accomplish those dreams that they couldn't achieve when they were young.
And where in the United States did they come?
So we came to New York and we settled in Queens in 1998. And this dream of making sure that their kids could go to school and that I could get an education, be the first one in the family to graduate from college, became my dream too, Laura. So I remember going to school and not knowing the language and doing my best to learn the language while also doing well in my classes and prepared to be a strong college candidate like many of my classmates. Very quickly, I realized that many of the ideals that we hold about this country and the ideas that we hold about how this country is, the country of the pursuit of happiness, of opportunity, of equity, of justice. I experienced, and our family experienced a lot of contradictions right away, with my parents being abused in the workplace and employers refusing to pay their wages because they were undocumented, or, my brother being a stop and frisk by NYPD when he was only 12 years old, and feeling often that I was treated differently because of my accent and also because of the color of my skin. And so as a young person, I certainly don't understand why all of these things are happening and why this country is in such contradiction of the ideals that my parents believed in and what drove them to make the courageous decision to come here. But, I'm trying to focus on honoring my parents' sacrifices and doing my best to go to college. But 9/11 happened when I was still in college and a year before graduating. And 9/11 really deepened my sense of consciousness about what it meant to be a person of color and an immigrant in this country.
How so?
Because after 9/11, for those of us who were here in New York, not only it was painful to see all the lives that were taken in a very traumatic event, but also how the government treated immigrants after, including, in New York, NYPD, the police was deployed all over the city. They were given the right to question anyone that may look suspicious, which, that really meant people of color and Muslim immigrants, or people that were perceived as immigrants or as Muslim. And I remember my family and I feeling really afraid of going to the train station because we saw military and police officers all over the subway stations in New York City. And we were afraid that we will get asked about our papers and that we could be discovered and potentially deported. And that intensification of the fear that you're living in this country undocumented and that you could get caught and you could be separated from your parents, that I couldn't, that I may not be able to see my parents again. It was just truly terrifying.
Did you talk about it in your family?
We definitely talked about it, Laura. We remember talking about how to avoid the subway stations, how to stay, at home, try to avoid contact with any law enforcement for fear of racial profiling. And also, this is the moment within our communities, and at least what I remember as a teenager at that time, I start hearing more deportations happening in the community. And this is quite frankly what opened my pathways to getting involved in community organizing, because I met young people like myself who had come with their families, grown up in this country. And because of the policies implemented after 9/11, for example, a registration program for Muslim young men led to people like Kamala Saheb, who was a college student at the time, to be put under deportation proceedings. And it was stories like the one of Kamal and Marie Gonzalez from Kansas, and also Walter Barrientos, who was a college friend at the time, and now we're life partners. He was also caught in a post 9/11 regime that went after immigrants. Walter was detained in an Amtrak train and put in deportation proceedings right away. So all of these experiences really not only, intensify the fear in immigrant communities, but for me and many others, it also fueled our desire to fight back, to organize our communities and ensure that our loved ones were able to stay here and not be deported.
So in addition to your work for immigration reform or just sane immigration policies, you've been involved in many other initiatives within the migrant population. What do you think are the most useful to lift up, the most valuable, or the ones that inspire you most?
I would say two. Number one, the unconventional courage that immigrants who are undocumented manifest every time that they are fighting against deportations. Especially in the early 2000s, it was unheard of that undocumented immigrants will speak out, will come out to share their stories as undocumented, and will fight for their right to remain, to stay in their home. And, many lawyers, many politicians told us we were crazy, that it was impossible, but we push the impossible to be possible when we came out and share our stories. I remember sharing my own story and being so afraid, but also feeling that I had to do it to protect my family and my community. And those coming out stories that also led to empowerment to fight deportations, and that has allowed us, in United We Dream, to support more than 1,000 families to stay and remain in the United States and fight their deportations, has been transformational. And then the second that I will lift up is right now, as we're going through a global pandemic that has disproportionately impacted Black, Brown communities, Indigenous communities, and that has left completely out undocumented immigrants from any coverage on healthcare and or unemployment support from the federal government. What we are seeing is undocumented communities and communities of color really lifting up not only their courage, but their resiliency that many of these communities show by organizing mutual funds and mutual aid to support each other. United We Dream alone, we were one of the many organizations that work in immigrant communities that created a national fund to support undocumented families hit the hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we saw was a small dollar donors, people that were donating $5, $10, $15, that then led to a fund that was over $200,000 in a matter of a week. And that allowed us to support about 400 families across the country in most need. But this is also happening in very small places. In my neighborhood of Jackson Heights, where I grew up in Queens, you're seeing organizations like This Is Rising Up and Moving, Make the Road New York, and many others who are coming together to support each other by organizing mutual aid funds, but also by supporting each other to be in community, as many people have lost family members. And, we may have seen the reporting on this, that many immigrants are not even able to say their proper goodbyes to their loved ones like everyone else, but also they don't have the resources to even be able to send their loved ones back to their home countries. That's been heartbreaking, but you also see the resilience of the community.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. My guest is MacArthur Genius Award winner Cristina Jiménez, co-founder of United We Dream, the largest immigrant youth-led network in the U.S., fighting for justice and dignity for immigrants and their families. Parts of today's conversation were featured in our episode Unforget, Dream, Build, which also featured award-winning journalist Roberto Lovato and a visit to an organization in one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the United States. Subscribe to our podcast to download that episode and get lots of audio extras, like my commentaries. I call them the F word. The latest is how the who said what to Harry and Meghan question is most certainly missing the white supremacist forest for the trees. You can find that at lauraflanders.org/listen. Next up, I asked Cristina Jiménez about what immigrants have to teach the rest of us about navigating life with the pandemic. But first, here's America by Sylvan Paul, released on Wolf and Lamb Records.
America is a bully. America is a gun. Blood, white, and blue. Come to America. America is a trigger. America is a pin. Come on up to America, we'll let you in.
In many parts of the United States today, there are white US-born people who are suddenly unable to travel, unable to visit their relatives, who are far away from loved ones, who are suffering economic dislocation. Are there things you have to teach in your community that might help the rest of us as we think about the right to move in a whole sort of different way?
As you share this, Laura, I could only think about the fact that immigrants have lived through the many impacts of this pandemic already. Being away from family members for many years, losing loved ones and not being able to connect with them. I lost both of my grandmothers while here, and I could not see them or give them their last goodbye because I was undocumented and I couldn't leave the country. And the pain that many people in this country are feeling right now, it's something that undocumented immigrants have lived with every day of their lives sometimes. And I think that the most important lesson that we can all really hold on to is how this pandemic has shown us that regardless of where we come from, regardless of where we are, and regardless of where we live, we depend on one another to survive this pandemic, and quite frankly, to figure out a way to build up from the devastating impact of this pandemic. Just as I think about the fact that many of us could still have food during this pandemic because we have courageous farm workers who are working to ensure that Americans are fed in the midst of the pandemic, or that we could have meat in our diets. Well, we have meat packing plant workers still working, and unfortunately in not the appropriate conditions under this pandemic. So I think that goes to show not only how even in a pandemic you could see the abuse of workers and taking for granted the labor, not only of immigrants, but working class people generally, but also how we're interconnected and how we depend on one another. A lot of these mutual aid funds have shown us that regardless of what country we come from, and regardless of whether we were born here or first or second generation immigrant, we're coming together to support one another. And I think that those are some of the best expressions of our shared humanity. And quite frankly, what should give us a lot to be inspired about for how we want to build the country moving forward.
In Queens, are you familiar with New Immigrant Community Empowerment?
Absolutely. That was an organization. Nice. New Immigrant Community Empowerment is an organization that supported my dad, actually, with many sessions and around understanding his rights. And they're an organization that has supported and created places where workers can not only understand their rights, but also organize and fight for justice. It's an organization that has been such an integral part of that community in Queens. And I know that during this pandemic, they have played a key role in ensuring that workers and immigrant families have food, because many of them have lost their jobs. Many of them got sick with the virus. As we know, that was one of the first epicenters of the pandemic in the country. And their work, which is grassroots, which is really about, texting your friends, calling your neighbors, and coming together, whether it is in the church or whether it is in a community organization like NICE, that has allowed food distribution to happen and that has ensured that children and immigrant families have something to eat.
Roberto Lovato reminds us to remember love in these stories. And I don't want to put you in an awkward spot, but we often talk about movement organizing as hard, and it's very hard what you do. But there's also some beauty in it. And you mentioned coming together with your partner, Walter. Anything about that romance you feel comfortable sharing?
Absolutely. It was first fear that really fueled my interest in understanding how could you protect people from deportation. It was also outrage at the injustices that my family, that my community was experiencing. But what's really underneath the fear and underneath our feelings of outrage, it's love for our community, it's love for ourselves, and love for fellow human beings. And when Walter was arrested and ordered deportation, we were college friends. He had been the first undocumented college student that I met. And, I remember having conversations with him about how to date when you're undocumented. And, we were very young at the time. And we connected and bonded on the undocumented experience. But when Walter was ordered deportation, and I faced a moment that many families face, that you don't know if you will be able to see that friend or that family member again, it was terrifying. And it was going through that difficult moment, but also coming together in community and taking action and calling our members of Congress and pressuring ICE to allow him to stay, that brought us together. Because after 5 days of very hard advocacy and pressing members of Congress to stop his deportation, he was released and he was allowed to fight his case in court. And Walter is still here today. And in fighting for his right to stay and in committing together to ensure that other families didn't have to go through what he went through, we built a movement together. Walter and I created United We Dream together with other young people in 2008. And, since then we've built a movement and we've built a life together, and we fell in love. And, I'm grateful that being in community and fighting for justice has not only put me at this place of being able to work with communities and change the lives of many, but also find my life partner.
So maybe that's another lesson for hard-nailed activists, that not only should there be tough stuff in the struggle, but sweet stuff too.
We have to find joy, because we cannot be only fueled by the negativity and by the injustices, which are very real. But finding joy in community, in relationship. And, for me, Laura, every time that I see a young person that was just as afraid as I was of being undocumented, and then all of a sudden they share their story, they come out as undocumented and unafraid, they find their voice. The next thing I see them, I think of someone like Christopher from Florida. His dad was deported to Honduras, and he actually got involved in fighting his dad's deportation. He was really shy. He was heartbroken and traumatized by the loss of his father. And the next thing is that I see him chanting, holding signs and marching and supporting other families in the process of fighting deportations and empowering others through his story. And when I think of people like him and many others, and seeing and witnessing that movement from fear to finding your voice, to feel empowered, and to helping and empowering others, I witness moments of transformation that for me are the joy and truly the hope that I have that this country can and should be better.
We are anticipating a new administration to the White House, an administration in part made possible through organizing by people like yourselves and voters like those that you've inspired. How do you think we can best move forward to address what some have referred to as one crow? I don't know whether that term resonates for you, but the kind of systemic challenges that remain embedded in our society when it comes to racial justice and equity.
One of the things that we know about the new administration is that this was a candidate that movements could actually move. United We Dream and many activists pushed Vice President Joe Biden to commit to stopping deportations in the first 100 days. It wasn't a commitment that he made right away, but through a lot of activism and pressure and really the movement making this a moral choice for his campaign, he committed to that. So one of the things that we know is that this administration is going to need us engaged to be able to hold them accountable to commitments that they made to our community. What we know for sure is that unlike the last administration, this is an administration that we can move and that we can change and that we can push for transformation. If anything, from my perspective, the most fun part comes about now, because we are about to create the pressure and the conditions so that our demands are met. So looking exactly at stopping deportations in the first 100 days is a matter of a priority for immigrant communities, taking action on addressing the impact of COVID right away in a way that is inclusive of all communities, and climate change and healthcare. I mean, these are all of the issues that you're going to see communities galvanized around, and to continue to put that pressure on accountability, because it's really the moment of seeing your demand becoming a reality when we win victories and change the material conditions for our communities. That's not to say that with one policy, we're going to get rid of white supremacy. That's not to say that with one bill or one administrative action from the next administration that we will resolve systematic racism. But it does mean that we can push for policies that are going to get us closer to that vision. And quite frankly, to me, the work is in the power of the movements, that we're going to push these administrations and these governments to serve the people and to do right by the people.
And does that term Juan Crow resonate with you?
For me, I think I really do not think, as Michelle Alexander points out in her book, The New Jim Crow, I just think that Jim Crow is now manifesting itself in different ways, because the same, elected officials that support the incarceration of Black people are the ones that are supporting the detention and the deportation of immigrants. The same corporations that benefit and the profit from the incarceration of Black people are also the same companies that are benefiting from the profits that immigrant detention bring. So there is so much interconnection of the few and the wealthy and corporations that are prioritizing profits over people. So I do think that, Jim Crow, it's manifesting in our society in a different way, which is why I think social movements and the coming together of, for example, movements like the Movement for Black Lives and the movement within the immigrant justice community to abolish ICE, those movements coming together and working together and demanding that we defund systems that are killing and incarcerating Black and brown people, and rather invest in schools, in healthcare systems, and in our communities to be able to thrive. The conversation that has been sparked by the demands about defunding the police, to some have been controversial, but it's so interesting to observe that it has not been controversial to see how over the years, our schools and our hospitals and our community clinics have been defunded massively every year. Where was our shock when that happened? So I think that we are, in a very hopeful change of conversation, that our communities deserve these investments versus in systems that are killing and incarcerating people.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Laura.
That was Cristina Jiménez of United We Dream. For more information on her, along with a list of links to related episodes from our archives and related articles, go to patreon.com/The LF Show. That's where you'll find all sorts of additional information and constructive suggestions for your reading, listening, and viewing pleasure. You can find Unforget, Dream, Build, the episode that portions of today's conversation was featured in, and a whole lot more. And while you're there, support the show by becoming a monthly donor to our Patreon partnership program. Like a magazine or a newspaper you subscribe to every week, your contribution, however small, keeps us going, ad-free and without commercials. So how about it? Support us at www.patreon.com/The LF Show. And continue your day as a proud Patreon partner of this sort of forward-thinking programming. Thanks. Go to patreon.com/The LF Show to sign up today. This episode was produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, Matt Colacello, Jeremiah Cothran, Charlotte Carpenter, Nat Needham, Jeannie Hopper, Dominic Marcella, Mercedes Crostiaga, Ryan Holtz, Rory O'Connor, and David Newman. Major funding for this program is provided by the Novo, Tomcat, Cloud Mountain, Fonda, Park, Shift Tides, and the Puss Family Foundation, as well as listeners like you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for contributing. Thanks for your ideas. Stay kind. Stay curious. Till the next time, I'm Laura.